Dawn had barely broken when a sudden explosion of sound shattered the early morning stillness in a quiet Tujunga neighborhood. People were busy getting ready for work when they heard the flashbangs go off. Neighbors were jolted alert and peered outside onto the narrow street as it flooded with law enforcement vehicles. Over a loudspeaker came the command, quote, "You need to come out, hands up." As the other residents cautiously stepped out of their homes, they were met with an astonishing sight. FBI agents, Los Angeles County Sheriff deputies, local police, and SWAT officers in tactical gear were swarming a large walled compound at the corner of McRory Street. What had been known to locals as an enigmatic church was now the epicenter of a massive federal raid. Behind the property's twisted iron gates, agents with rifles took cover while others rammed open the entrances and fanned out across the grounds. In the half light of morning, silhouettes of people emerged one by one from the sprawling home, hands raised. Officers swiftly secured at least half a dozen individuals, lining them up on the driveway in plastic handcuffs. Among those detained, witness noted, was an elderly woman in a wheelchair and a young mother clutching a child. A jarring reminder that this was no ordinary crime scene. No gunshots were fired and no injuries were reported during the operation, but the drama unfolding left neighbors in disbelief. Neighbors watched the commotion in astonishment, some saying that they had a feeling something like this was going to be happening to this compound. The tall gates of the property, usually sealed shut and obscured by walls of trees, now swung open, an almost symbolic image of secrecy breached. For years, the occupants of this compound had kept it tightly barricaded behind ever higher walls and thick foliage. The Shekinah church residence had been a source of unease since the day its occupants moved in a few years ago. So today we are going to jump into all of the details of this raid. So sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cult, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. I post one or two videos on a cult of my choosing every single week, and sometimes even feature some true crime cases. So if this is something you are interested in or curious about, please consider subscribing to the channel. I would absolutely love to have you here. Now, just before we jump in, if you don't know about the M7 TikTok dance cult, you should. I did a whole deep dive featured right here. I will link it if you want some context for this video. I'm going to do a very brief overview of the cult itself, but this video will focus more on the raids. So if you feel like you need a little more context, pop over to that video first and then come on back here and learn about everything new that's going on. I was going to go live to try to put all this together, but just my schedule wasn't aligning and I just wanted to get the information out to you guys as quickly as I could. I mean, I'm still about a week late. I wanted to get this out to you right as it was happening. But yeah, this is the season of cult raids. So as we learn new information, I will try to keep you all updated as quickly as possible. So without further ado, let's jump into all of the details. Now, some of you may remember the man at the center of this controversy, Robert Shinn, the 63-year-old pastor who led the Shekinah church and controlled the house that was raided, was escorted out of that house and placed in custody the morning of the raid, though officials were quick to clarify that he was detained for questioning, not formally arrested. As Shinn and several followers sat handcuffed on the curb under guard, agents fanned through the mansion's rooms, offices, and garages, executing a meticulous search. They carried out box after box of documents, computers, and potential evidence, loading, quote, cartons of evidence into an SUV, unquote, as news helicopters hovered overhead. Now, this dramatic raid was the culmination of a multi agency federal investigation into this alleged cult that blended charismatic religion with TikTok stardom. And it's been a bizarre intersection of faith and fame that has quietly embedded itself in Los Angeles. Authorities later confirmed that 5 search warrants were executed that day at various properties linked to Shinn and his organization. The operation involved the FBI, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, the IRS, the Department of Labor, as well as local police SWAT units working all in concert together, which is so rare to hear. It's so rare to hear these like cross departments like actually functionally working with each other. It's incredible. Now, the list of suspected crimes was staggering. We have trafficking, forced labor, money laundering, mail and tax fraud, and even pandemic related fraud tied to COVID-19 relief funds. The very notion that such crimes might lurk behind the walls of a suburban church compound left the community reeling. But for a dedicated group of ex members, family survivors, and investigative journalists, this day has been a long time coming. And what I've said in so many videos is that the downfall of a cult usually doesn't come from them being a cult and using coercive control to manipulate people into doing what they want. There's usually something really insidious under all of the layers of all of that disgusting detail, right? Because unfortunately, coercive control isn't illegal. Just like we saw in the Diddy trial, it is aggravatingly difficult to actually prosecute people when their victim is claiming they were coerced into doing something. It's getting better, but it's just simply not there yet. So the downfall of most cults come from tax evasion, something like this after like a long investigation, which can be very, very aggravating, but also when you can find evidence to what it sounds like several felonious charges, it will be poetic justice. Melanie Lee, who was a survivor of this cult, said, "We've been dreaming about this day." She actually was able to escape his grasp years ago. She went on to say, "We've been praying about this day, the beginning of where justice will be served for all the victims." Now, to understand how a TikTok dance troupe became the target of a sex trafficking probe, one must go back nearly 3 decades. Robert Shinn did not always envision leading a global social media ministry. In fact, Shinn was once a licensed medical doctor in Canada. In the early 1990s, however, he underwent a dramatic personal transformation and left medicine behind. He immigrated to the United States and decided to reinvent himself as an evangelical pastor with a direct line to God. Because that's what they all have, right? In 1994, Shinn founded the Shekinah Church in Los Angeles. This was a small, charismatic congregation named after the Hebrew word for the divine presence. Initially, Shekinah was tiny, maybe 15 members, many of them Shinn's own relatives. But Shinn's ambitions were anything but modest. He preached a demanding gospel of absolute loyalty, self sacrifice, and above all, his own authority as God's chosen man of God. Followers later recalled that Shinn claimed prophetic status, positioning himself as an apostle or conduit through whom spoke directly. This trait placed him with a burgeoning religious movement known as the New Apostolic Reformation, where self-proclaimed apostles wield near total control over disciples in the name of divine revelation. Because, of course, they do. Shinn's fledgling ministry fit the mold. He convinced congregants that he held the keys to their salvation and that leaving his fold meant spiritual doom. Now, in the early years, life inside Shekinah was intensely insular. Recruits, often impressionable teenagers or young adults, were urged to move into communal housing under the church's control, where Shinn dictated their daily routines. Melanie Lee, who joined Shekinah at 15 years old, recalls how she and her sister were shuffled between church owned homes every few months, forbidden from forming outside friendships or even seeing each other regularly. Church leaders controlled everything from their diet to their contact with family. And over time, Shinn's demands grew more extreme. Melanie says that as she reached adulthood, Shinn delivered an ultimatum. To achieve spiritual perfection, she would have to pay her price by becoming his mistress. Horrified, Melanie fled the church in the dead of night, engineering a risky escape from Shinn's clutches. Her departure over a decade ago marked one of the first known breakaways from Shekinah, but it did little to slow Shinn's expansion. And I just have to say, it was so incredibly brave of her to leave a group she basically grew up in, and she has continued to speak out. She has been so incredibly brave throughout this process, and not just brave, but also extremely patient. Now, even as Melanie Lee and others escaped, Shekinah's church grew quickly. Shinn was very charismatic and very shrewd. He began establishing various business ventures like a cafe, flower shops, real estate, and mortgage companies, all ostensibly normal enterprises, but in reality, largely staffed and managed by loyal church members whose labor and earnings flowed all the way back to Shinn. And I bet you're wondering, I wonder what these employees were paid. Probably nothing, is what I'd venture to guess. Yeah. By one former member's account, Shinn's real estate and mortgage businesses pulled in over $1 million in commissions in 2021. Yet, the church member who did the work saw almost none of the profits. Financial records later examined in court showed a pattern. Believers worked long hours for Shinn's companies, but their paychecks went straight into joint accounts controlled by the church. Members were then given meager stipends or allowances of, get this, perhaps, maybe $80 every 2 weeks. $80 every 2 weeks in Los Angeles. You can't even go to Air Horn or whatever it's called and get a week's worth of groceries for that. That's insane. Another former congregant, Jung Hee Lee, sued the church in 2013, alleged that she'd been forced to work 40 hours a week without pay, receiving only a $30 weekly stipend. And luckily, she eventually won back wages in a judgment against Shinn's organization. So these labor practices, exploitative as they were, well, they served a dual purpose. They enriched the church and further bound members to Shinn economically while leaving them with little independence. This is financial control. This is financial abuse. If you make your congregants, your followers, your partner totally dependent on you for their survival, which means finances in a capitalistic society, it makes it that much more difficult for anyone to ever leave. As Vanity Fair journalist Jane Borden observes, quote, almost all high control groups are money-making endeavors, and they prey on those who are already economically unstable, unquote. By targeting young people of modest means, Shinn created a dependency loop. He would provide housing, work, and spiritual purpose, while members surrendered financial control and personal autonomy. In the late 2010s, however, Robert Shinn's empire took a turn that would bring it infamy. At a time when his church membership might have plateaued, Shinn found an unlikely growth vector: the world of competitive hip hop dancers and TikTok influencers. Around 2018, a well known street dancer and choreographer named James B. Derrick crossed paths with Shinn's son, Isaiah Shinn, who was dabbling in video production. So these two began collaborating with each other. B Dash would dance and Isaiah would film everything. And the partnership quickly bore fruit in the social media realm. And about a year later, B Dash started introducing Isaiah to other talented dancers in his circle. So what started as a fun collaboration with young people suddenly turned insidious. Because Shinn took a personal interest in the troupe of ambitious 20 something dancers who started visiting his church's Bible study at Isaiah's invitation. So literally, Isaiah would be like, "Come to my Bible study," not letting any of them know, oh, it's a cult. And many of these people were transplants to Los Angeles. They were new to the city's cutthroat entertainment scene. They shared common struggles: low pay, gig to gig uncertainty, and a hunger for their big break. Shin keenly observed their frustrations with exploitative managers and sparse opportunities. Sensing his own opportunity, he made a tantalizing pitch that he would form a talent management company to personally represent these dancers, promising to catapult them to fame and fortune, all while providing spiritual guidance. And it was an easy sell. Quote, a lot of young men and women travel to LA with their big dream and they get wrapped up in a lot of things that aren't fair, unquote. This is what Kaylee Gray, a former client of Shinn's company, said. Quote, they don't get paid enough, they get overworked, there's not a lot of opportunity. They see Robert's house, watching him drive these luxury cars. That's why a place like Shekinah can look so alluring, unquote. And indeed, for dancers scraping by in cramped apartments, Shin's lavish lifestyle, a gated home, high end cars, apparent industry connections, radiated success. If a prosperous doctor turned pastor offered to mentor their careers and save their souls in the process, why not seize the chance? And thus was born 7M Films in 2021. Shin's shiny new talent management agency, named ostensibly for the biblical 7 mountains of cultural influence. And look, I know it's humans' impulse to be a little bit judgmental about this sort of thing. But as someone who has lived the starving artist life, who is an actor who considered moving to LA for the opportunities there, I can tell you, not quite firsthand because I didn't end up going to LA, but it is a very, very difficult lifestyle. So, first of all, I just want to paint the picture a little bit if you're not in more of a creative or artistic space. Imagine that you go to get like a 9 to 5 job over and over and over and over and over again, and you never get an opportunity ever. But when you do get that yes, finally, you have to show up like the next day or within 2 days. You have to be willing to basically quit whatever job you have at the drop of a hat when you get an opportunity to do your art. So even if you have like a side gig, you might need to be on set or at a dance rehearsal or whatever it may be the very next day and just have to tell your job like, "Hey, bye." So the financial stability is really, really, really difficult in this line of work. Additionally, a lot of creatives really are kind of desperate for some kind of spiritual or mental clarity because you are rejected all of the time. And sometimes, like as an actor, you're not even rejected. You are just ghosted. You never hear anything ever. You never get feedback. You never learn what you can do better. You're just supposed to send your audition and hope for the best. And you might never hear anything ever from that casting director or the production or your agent, even. They might not ever give you feedback. So it can be very dehumanizing. It can give you really bad self esteem. And I think all of my artist friends have either turned towards some type of therapy or counseling or to some kind of spiritual practice. I think that's partly why we find so many creative people who get sucked into cults because we just want to figure out a way to enjoy life through all of the rejection. It does get really, really hard. And if you add that on top of financial stress because you're not consistently working, it's difficult to keep a full-time job, it's really hard to balance auditions and bookings and your full-time job, and then not getting bookings, and then not getting auditions, and then trying to find a manager and trying to find an agent, and, oh, I have to cancel a vacation because I got an audition, and if I don't show up to the audition, they're going to think I don't care. There's so many mind F's that like go on in your head as an artist. So I just want to kind of like put that out there as someone who is basically living the lifestyle right now as I'm pursuing acting still. It's challenging to say the least. I mean, I just really hope my boss doesn't find my channel and watch this, but like I've had to learn to lie a lot, and I hate lying. I've had a lot of emergency appointments this year. Tomorrow, I actually need to come up with some kind of story for whatever appointment I have to go on because got a call back for a commercial. Like it's just constantly pivoting. So all of that to say, let's give grace to these creatives because it's difficult life. And I totally understand how if Shinn is basically handing them a lifeline, like you will get to do what you love to do every day and I will pay for everything. And not only that, I will get you opportunities and you can live in my mansion with me. Yeah, if I was in that boat, I might say yes too. So back to 7M, the new production team. To the public, 7M Films presented itself as a trendy media production outfit that helped TikTok and Instagram influencers land gigs in music videos, commercials, and live tours. Shinn installed himself as the CEO, with his son Isaiah and his wife Hannah serving as directors and liaisons to the dance world. Their first roster of talent largely came from the circle of B-Derek. Among them were B-'s dance partner Miranda Wilking, a Michigan-born dancer who, with her sister, had amassed over 3 million TikTok followers doing upbeat viral dance routines. Miranda moved to LA in 2020 to pursue professional dance and soon fell under Shinn's orbit and under the spell of his teachings. And she married B-. So there's that. She is hooked in there. Now, at first, of course, the entire arrangement seemed a little benign, even beneficial. The dancers, including Miranda, did see some career bumps. Shinn's company got them flashy bookings, dancing for pop music artists, and at high-profile events. They continued churning out choreographed TikTok videos that delighted millions of fans. But behind the scenes, the line between professional management and cult control blurred quickly. Shinn insisted the talent attend Shekinah church sermons and Bible studies as a condition of their representation. He encouraged and eventually required the young performers to move out of their own apartments and into homes he owned near the church, ostensibly to form a creative community, but in reality to better isolate and monitor them. Now, once ensconced in Shinn's residences, the dancers found their lives increasingly micromanaged. Shinn began dictating with whom they could socialize, which projects they could take, and even what music they could dance to. One day they were edgy urban dancers, and the next, Shinn had them performing choreography to sanitized oldies like Johnny Be Good and Surfin' Safari, presumably to project a more wholesome image. But most troubling was Shinn's financial grip on the group. Now, standard talent managers in LA and elsewhere might take 10 to 20% of a client's earnings as commission. And Shinn indeed took a 20% management fee. But he didn't stop there. Under the guise of religious duty, Shinn pressured his dancers to donate an additional 30% or more of every paycheck to his church. So they're giving 20% to him for finding the job. They're giving 30% to the church. They're giving another 30% to the government because of taxes, and usually these creative jobs are either 1099 or W-9. Taxes aren't taken out, so you have to save that or pay quarterly taxes. So they're left with 20% of their paycheck. They're making $20 per 100 that they book through this management company. Not a good deal. And then, of course, Shinn would somehow add in additional fees for being a part of his organization. Maybe it would be, oh, well, we're doing a charity drive and you have to give to charity. Or, oh, this is a part of your living expense. I mean, the fees just started to keep adding up. But because they're all conditioned by Shinn's teachings, they rarely protested. He taught them that wealth was a sign of God's favor, and that by surrendering worldly earnings to the church, they would reap spiritual riches. Yeah. Classic prosperity gospel over here. We've heard it a million times. And indeed, Shinn promised his flock great material wealth in the long run, positioning himself as the savvy guru who could make them prosperous, but only if they obeyed, tithed, and worked hard. And at the same time, he instilled fear in them. If anyone considered leaving or disobeying, they were told their souls and their families' souls were at risk of eternal damnation. He also preached that friends and family outside of his fold were tools of Satan. And only by abandoning those tools of Satan could members achieve salvation. He literally told his followers that they needed to die in their family's eyes. That's how much he cut them off from the outside world and from their loved ones. And conversely, he dangled a twisted carrot. If disciples proved godly enough in their devotion to him, they alone could save their family members' souls from damnation. So this was a powerful incentive to stay and submit to Shinn. Now, within a year, the transformation was stark. The once sunny, independent TikTok dancers had become deeply enmeshed in Shinn's cultic world. They prayed fervently under his direction, they worked within his businesses, and socialized almost exclusively among themselves. It was an insular clique increasingly estranged from the outside. Now, Miranda Wilking Derrick, for example, grew very distant from her sister, Melanie Wilking, and their parents back in Michigan. The Wilkings, who had always been very close knit, sensed that something was off by late 2020 when Miranda's communication started to dwindle. In January 2021, a breaking point came. Miranda refused to attend her own grandfather's funeral, to which she had been extremely close. Dean and Kelly Wilking, her father and mother, were baffled by this and utterly heartbroken. So they flew to Los Angeles to plead with their daughter in person, urging her to come home for the funeral or at least spend some time with the family. Miranda, by then firmly under Shinn's sway, was evasive and agitated at their unannounced visit. When pressed for why she couldn't leave even for a day, she blurted out a statement that sent chills through her father's spine. I need to ask someone closer to God than you if I can go. Now, her father, Dean, recalls that moment with tears. It was then that he says, I knew she was gone. His once vibrant daughter was now deferring basic personal decisions to an unseen religious authority, presumably Pastor Shinn, whom she deemed more spiritually valid than her parents. For the Wilking family, it was as if Miranda had died in a different way. The loving daughter and sister they knew was subsumed by a cult persona. For the next year, families like the Wilkings struggled mostly in silence, unsure how to extract their loved ones from Shinn's grip. Many of the youngest dancers cut off contact with parents and old friends and moved into Shinn's communal homes and appeared only in social media in carefully choreographed videos that gave no hint of distress. But in early 2022, the facade began to crack publicly. On February 24th, 2022, Melanie Wilking and her parents, Dean and Kelly, took a desperate leap of faith. And not the kind that Shinn preached, but one leveraging the very platform that had made their daughter famous. They hosted a live broadcast on Instagram and TikTok, tearfully telling the world that Miranda was involved in a cult that had brainwashed her. In the emotional live stream, viewed by hundreds of thousands of people in real time, Melanie described how her sister had become unreachable and was being controlled by a mysterious pastor named Robert Shinn and his organization 7M. The Wilkings claimed that Miranda was effectively being held hostage by manipulation, forbidden from speaking to her family unless supervised, and she wasn't allowed to leave the group's housing. They begged Miranda directly through the camera to come home, or at least call them without Shinn's influence, and implored any viewers who knew someone in 7M to help. The dramatic plea went viral. It, quote, captured the imagination of millions on TikTok, unquote. Fans of the Wilkins sisters who had innocently enjoyed their dance videos were shocked to learn that behind the scenes, a cult allegation was brewing. And the story was then picked up by news outlets and gossip sites. Robert Shinn's name was thus thrust into the spotlight as the alleged leader of the operation. Within days, other concerned family members and ex-members found the courage to speak up as well. Former 7M dancers and ex-Shekinah cult members began contacting reporters or posting their own accounts on social media, echoing a pattern of coercive control, financial exploitation, and abuse. Allegations surfaced that some dancers, including minors at the time, had been pressured into exploitative labor contracts, forced to turn over their earnings, and even perform unpaid work for Shinn's businesses. Others recounted sexual misconduct, claims that Shinn had groped or propositioned young female members, or in the case of older church members like Priscilla, far worse. Now, you'll remember me talking about Melanie Lee. Melanie Lee was Priscilla's sister. Priscilla was much younger than Melanie, and who somehow and sadly was still in Shinn's church. She refused to leave with her sister. She would later reveal that she had endured, quote, continual R word at Shinn's whim, unquote, for years while being kept as a virtual prisoner of the church. Priscilla did ultimately escape during filming of that documentary in 2023, and she did lend her voice to the chorus of survivors. She has been so incredibly brave, and since some of the allegations are so recent and occurred while she was still in the cult, it's got to be even more difficult for her to speak out, but her voice has been so loud and necessary in order to take someone like Shinn down. It's so hard to be an activist against something that you're actively healing from. But man, we have to hand it to Melanie and Priscilla. They have done incredible, incredible work, especially in regard to how brave they've been. So, faced with mounting public scrutiny, Shinn and his camp went on the defensive. 7M Inc. issued a terse statement on Instagram on June 4th, 2024. Its first and only public post, and it called the accusations a slanderous work of fiction born from a failed extortion attempt. They categorically denied running a cult or abusing anyone and warned that they would pursue legal remedies to stop the spread of salacious lies. And privately, however, Shinn was well aware that his former followers were not going to stay silent. In fact, he attempted a preemptive legal strike. In mid-2022, Shinn filed a defamation lawsuit against several outspoken ex-members of Shekinah Church, notably the sisters Priscilla and Melanie Lee, accusing them of lying about him. Now, if Shinn hoped to intimidate his detractors into silence with litigation, the plan backfired spectacularly. The Lee sisters and a group of 5 other former members countersued Shinn in LA County Civil Court, lodging an explosive 52-count complaint in late 2022. Their lawsuit accused Shinn, his church, and 7M Films of a litany of offenses: fraud, coercion, human trafficking, forced labor, sexual battery, false imprisonment, unfair business practices. Whew. And that's just the first few. There's more. They painted Shinn as a self-proclaimed man of God, living a lavish life on the backs of brainwashed TikTok dancers. And that's a quote. These dancers were systematically sexually abused and extorted, according to these court filings. One particularly chilling excerpt from the complaint alleged that Shinn convinced his members that if they didn't submit fully to him, their lives and their families' lives would be destroyed forever, and they would go to hell. He said that this was their last chance to get to heaven by rapture. Because, of course, when a cult leader believes that he is about to get taken down, they start screaming rapture. It's happened in so many of these groups. In other words, he was using religious terror as a weapon. He cursed those who disobeyed and blessed those who obeyed, even if obedience meant unthinkable abuse. That civil case, essentially Shinn versus former members, turned into a protracted legal battle throughout 2023 and into 2024. Shinn attempted to get the case thrown out by arguing his actions were protected by the First Amendment, but a judge rejected that maneuver. By early 2024, the lawsuit was on track for a jury trial scheduled for July 5th, 2025. This meant that, as the world would soon see, Robert Shinn was due to face a reckoning in court, albeit a civil one, right around the same time federal agents were quietly closing in on him from another side. Amid these legal salvos, documentary filmmakers were also hard at work bringing the TikTok cult story to the mainstream. Director Derek Deneen, known for immersive social issue documentaries, began following the saga soon after the Wilkins viral plea in 2022. Sensing the urgency that this was a cult in progress, not one long finished, Deneen filmed interviews with former members and shadowed families trying to rescue loved ones. Over 2023, his team captured dramatic developments. Priscilla Lee's escape from the church after 2 decades inside, and delicate attempts by families to reconnect with current 7M dancers behind the scenes. On May 29th, 2024, Netflix released the 3-part docu-series Dancing for the Devil, the 7M TikTok cult, and it quickly became a sensation, racking up over 4.4 million views in its first week and igniting widespread discussion. The series laid bare Shinn's world in disturbing detail. Interviews with survivors described the physical, sexual, and psychological abuse they suffered, and investigative segments illuminated the financial pyramid that kept Shinn's operation afloat. For added measure, the docuseries included commentary from cult experts and psychologists who contextualized the events within broader patterns of cult behavior in America. High-profile viewers like rapper Cardi B went on social media rants expressing outrage, with Cardi drawing parallels between Shinn's manipulation of dancers and the exploitation she'd witnessed in other industries. So overnight, Robert Shinn found himself one of the most notorious cult figures in the country, his name trending and his actions dissected across podcasts and talk shows. Under such heat, one might expect authorities to swoop in immediately, but reality is often slower than headlines. While public pressure mounted, exemplified by protesters even picketing outside one of Shinn's properties after the documentary aired, law enforcement still needed hard evidence to act. In Los Angeles, investigators from several federal agencies had indeed started quietly probing Shinn around this time, spurred by the same clues unearthed by journalists and survivors. According to law enforcement sources, a federal task force was piecing together a case throughout late 2024 and early 2025. Because Shinn's alleged crimes spanned multiple domains, financial fraud, labor exploitation, potential human, the investigation required coordination between different arms of the government. The IRS scrutinized Shinn's tangled finances, looking at whether he evaded taxes on the millions flowing through church-affiliated businesses. The Department of Labor examined possible wage theft and labor law violations, given testimony that dancers and staff were effectively unpaid or grossly underpaid. The U.S. Postal Inspection Service, or the law enforcement arm of the USPS, got involved when evidence suggested mail fraud or the use of postal services in Shinn's financial schemes, possibly related to how donations or fees were solicited and routed. And crucially, the FBI, particularly its civil rights and human units, focused on the and coercion allegations, which by then included claims that Shinn had sexually abused multiple female members and possibly transported individuals across state lines under false pretenses. Each agency built its piece of the puzzle under grand jury secrecy. By mid this year, these parallel tracks converged into a coordinated plan, obtaining search warrants that could yield the evidence needed to bring formal changes. So, for survivors like Melanie Lee, this buildup was agonizing yet vindicating. She and others had spent years filing police reports, speaking to lawyers, and collecting any proof they could to get the government to intervene. Many times their pleas seemed to fall on deaf ears. But now Melanie sensed the winds shifting. In the days leading up to July 25th, 2025, she got word that something big might finally happen. And when it did, she was ready to see it through. Standing outside the cordoned off McRory Street property on the morning of the raid, Melanie was overcome with emotion. Quote, "After years of urging law enforcement to investigate, I now feel vindicated," she says, voice shaking with relief. Watching agents haul out evidence bags, she was confident they would find proof of what she had been saying all along. Quote, "I know for a fact that they will find things, that he's done things that are evil. He's a criminal, being investigated for sex trafficking and money laundering and tax evasion. And this is someone that calls himself a pastor. I can definitely say whatever is coming for him, he deserves it." So this July 2025 raid involved breaching the gates and detaining several individuals as investigators searched for evidence of fraud and other crimes. Neighbors described hearing flashbang grenades and FBI commands at dawn. On that fateful Friday, the operation in Tujunga was just one piece of a larger enforcement action. Acting on 5 separate search warrants, agents simultaneously hit multiple locations tied to Shinn's ministries and businesses across Los Angeles. The McRory Street house was believed to be a central commune where Shinn and many of his followers lived, a sprawling property where high walls had long concealed the comings and goings of the so-called TikTok cult. Other locations included offices associated with 7M Films, possibly storage sites of financial records, and residences of key church lieutenants. By late morning, unmarked federal SUVs could be seen parked outside at least 5 addresses as agents carried out synchronized searches. While Shinn himself was detained at the Tujunga site, no immediate arrests were announced at any location. Officials emphasized that the investigation was ongoing and that evidence was being collected for a potential future indictment. At the McRory compound, once the dust settled, investigators took stock of what they had found. The sight of IRS agents sifting through file boxes in the driveway and postal inspectors photographing stacks of mail in the home offices spoke volumes about the scope of the alleged wrongdoing. Although details remain sealed in federal court, authorities indicated the probe spans years of financial transactions and communications with Shinn's organization. One law enforcement source described rooms filled with business records, donation logs, and computer equipment that were seized for forensic analysis. This source declined to be named, citing the ongoing case. Television news footage also showed agents leading away several luxury vehicles from the property, possibly to be checked for evidence of money flows or these being assets purchased with illicit funds. By midday, evidence technicians had loaded dozens of cartons into trucks, a visual confirmation that the raid yielded a trove of material for investigators to comb through. In the immediate aftermath, the authorities remained tight-lipped about specifics. A spokesperson for the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, Patricia Mendoza, issued a carefully worded statement. "We're working closely with our local, state, and federal parties on this ongoing investigation. This remains an active case, and we are continuing to gather and review information." The implication is clear. This is just the beginning. Any criminal charges would come only after agents sifted through the evidence and conferred with federal prosecutors. That could take weeks or months. So for now, Shinn and the others detained are not officially booked into jail. They were questioned and most were released pending the next phase of the investigation. Now, this is a standard procedure in complex financial or cases to execute searches and start building up a detailed case file before making formal arrests to try to ensure that when those charges are filed, they are backed by solid evidence and these people just cannot get away. So far, officials have hinted at a range of potential charges on the table. Legal analyst Mary David notes that Shinn could ultimately face an array of federal counts, including the tax evasion and money laundering charges. The trafficking allegation is perhaps the most severe because it implies that Shinn or his associates may have coerced or deceived individuals into commercial sex acts or sexually explicit performances. This is a charge that, if proven, carries a prison sentence of 15 years to life in federal court. Now, importantly, trafficking doesn't only refer to strangers grabbed off streets. In this context, it could involve Shinn exploiting his spiritual authority to obtain sexual favors or labor, essentially using spiritual coercion as a means of. Now, Mary David spoke on this case. She's a victims' rights attorney. She's not involved in the case, but she does say, quote, coercion is especially sinister when it involves a religious leader, because here you have a figure who is almost seen as a connection and gateway to God. So victims feel like they are potentially risking their salvation or the salvation of others if they do not do what he says. And it's so true and tragic. It's just so disgusting to exploit people's beliefs and fear and connection to a higher power so that you can have ultimate control over them and violate them. David also goes to explain that proving such a charge could require demonstrating how Shinn's religious manipulations rose to the level of force, fraud, or coercion as defined by law. For instance, showing that women like Priscilla were effectively unable to really consent or refuse due to fear of divine retribution or psychological domination. Because consent cannot exist if fear is in the room. Prosecutors will hopefully leverage survivors' testimonies, communications like text messages and emails, where Shinn gives orders or threats, and any corroborating evidence like journals or recordings to make this case. Given the accounts already made public, like Shinn demanded sexual obedience as a path to heaven, well, experts say that a trafficking charge is not a stretch, but that all remains to be seen. We all know that these things are really difficult to prove in court, unfortunately. Now, on the financial front, evidence of money laundering and fraud could stem from the Byzantine flow of cash through Shinn's network. Investigators are likely to analyze whether Shinn misused nonprofit status to hide taxable income, or whether he structured transactions or shell companies to disguise the origin of funds, and if they fraudulently obtained any pandemic-related aid, like a PPP loan, by misrepresenting their operations. The mention of pandemic era fraud in the warrant suggests scrutiny of any C-19 relief funds that 7M Films or the church linked businesses might have applied for. For instance, if Shinn's entities claimed payroll for employees who were in fact unpaid labor or claimed losses that were fabricated, that would constitute fraud. And likewise, mail fraud could be in play if any part of the scheme used postal services, perhaps soliciting donations via mailers or sending false invoices, etc., as part of defrauding members or the government. Each financial charge might not seem as sensational as the claim, but they're significant. Money laundering alone can carry up to 20 years in prison per count. Why is it more than SA and king? I'll never know. But yeah, you get 5 more years if you launder money, because I guess money is valued more than women's autonomy. Federal fraud statutes often likewise carry hefty penalties. And in many cult related prosecutions, it's the financial crimes that are the easiest to prove on paper. By the evening of the raid, news of the operation, often headlined as the bust of a TikTok cult, dominated headlines. TV networks replayed aerial footage of Shinn's compound with agents swarming, and talk shows debated how a cult could recruit through TikTok, which is such an exhausting argument as someone who has seen so many cults start online. Now, in the days following the raid, reactions poured in from those whose lives had been affected by Shinn's dual empire of church and dance. For the survivors who broke away and sounded the alarm, there was a profound sense of vindication and relief. Melanie Lee recounted her teenage indoctrination and abuse under Shinn and gave multiple interviews expressing a mix of joy and solemn satisfaction. Quote, "We've been dreaming about this day, for the day that the beginning of justice will be served for all the victims," she said. At the same time, she emphasized that this is just step one. "I hope," she says, "that the families that have been torn apart are able to be reunited, and Robert's victims are finally able to get the closure, healing, and justice they deserve." Her use of the word beginning is telling. Survivors see the raid as the start of a process that could lead to court trials and ideally accountability. Melanie and others have made it clear that they intend to cooperate fully with law enforcement to ensure Shinn and any co-conspirators are prosecuted. Her sister, Priscilla Lee, has not spoken publicly about the raid, but a friend relayed that Priscilla broke down in tears at the news. This friend said that Priscilla felt years of darkness were finally coming to light. Priscilla is one of the plaintiffs in the ongoing civil suit against Shinn, a case that's now bolstered by the momentum of a criminal investigation. And it's worth noting that if federal charges are filed, they could either delay the civil trial or prompt a settlement, as Shinn might prioritize his criminal defense. The survivors' attorneys have stated that they are sharing any relevant evidence from their civil discovery with prosecutors, indicated a united front to stop Shinn. For many family members of those still in the group, the raid brought a wave of hope and anxiety. Dean and Kelly Wilking have not given a formal statement, but sources close to the family say that they are cautiously optimistic that this intervention might finally break Shinn's hold over their daughter, Miranda. And let's hope, because it is so heartbreaking to see people continue to support the cult leaders that violated them. The Wilkings reportedly flew to Los Angeles shortly after the raid to be close to the situation in case there's an opportunity to see or speak with their daughter. However, as of this video, Miranda Derrick remains with the Shekinah 7N group, and there is no indication so far that she has renounced Shinn. The coming weeks will likely test which path Miranda and the remaining Shekinah faithful take. Significantly, no current cult member was arrested or removed from the premises by force. Since the warrants were for evidence and the investigation rather than for immediate rescue or arrest, followers were left in sort of limbo. They saw their leader led away in handcuffs and then presumably released later that day. So one can only imagine the spin within the group. Perhaps Shinn will claim it as a trial from God, or that nothing incriminating was found. So right now we're kind of in a waiting game. Will the victims of this cult be able to break free, or will this unfortunately reinforce Shinn's ideology that everybody on the outside are just working with the devil and push them closer to him as the investigation moves forward? These are the things that are so delicate in cults, because oftentimes the people that are trying to do the work to speak out or expose the cult for what it is, they just fall into this false narrative that gets pushed by the cult leader to the members still involved. And it kind of reinforces the scary tactics that Shinn uses against people in the cult. So it's it's really a delicate time, and all we can really do is continue to talk about it and continue to be gentle towards the survivors, especially considering they're public figures. Like, these dancers are creating content constantly, and going into their comments and saying, you're in a cult, you're in a cult, you're brainwashed, is not going to help them. You're only going to be reinforcing the idea that Shinn is likely telling these victims and survivors, which is, see, they're all against you. They're going to call us a cult because they don't understand us. They're going to call us a cult because they're all working with the devil. That's the narrative that he's going to be spinning. It's just utterly heartbreaking. It's such a weird place to be in when something like this happens, because on one hand you want to like jump up and down and celebrate, but on the other hand there is this fear of, oh no, are the people currently in the group going to wake up now, or are they going to get sucked in even further? It's just such a kind of like tread with caution situation right now. But overall, I think it is great. I think the truth is going to come out sooner than we expect it to. And I just always have to commend the survivors that are constantly speaking out against Shekinah and Robert Shinn. This is not easy to do. It is not. There must be so many feelings involved. You probably feel some shame for quote unquote falling for it. You feel empowered because you left. You feel judged because people are judging you, especially if you're speaking out. So, all I ask is that we please continue to be kind and gentle to anyone who might still be in this group, especially if they are social media influencers, because they are victims in this situation. They are. So, I'm sure we'll learn more. I'm really concerned about the allegations, because I just hope some of these influencers and dancers that we've followed who were young and impressionable haven't been getting taken advantage of. That's so scary and such a heartbreaking thing to think about, and absolutely breaks my heart for the victims that are still involved. And I think we need to show a lot of care and compassion, but also celebrate with the people who were the whistleblowers and who have been doing so much work and have been such incredible examples of what bravery looks like. And we just need to uplift these voices, share more, talk to our friends about it, and really celebrate the people who have been speaking out, because again, it is not easy. So, as always, I am eager to hear your input down below. Please remember to keep it respectful. I know we all have different opinions, and this is a great place to have some constructive dialogue with one another, but let's avoid ad hominem attacks or anything too rude. And but you guys are usually pretty good about that. It's usually like the random troll that in the cult or cult adjacent that says anything. But let me know in the comments what you would like me to cover down below. And if you watched until the end, leave a little dancing emoji. And thank you guys all so much for watching today. I hope you all have a great rest of your week. I really appreciate all of your support. Stay safe out there. Always ask questions and always stay skeptical. I'll see you in my next video very soon. Thanks again, guys. Bye.